This live stream is brought to you by Still and Evergreen Garden Care. Still is Australia's most trusted brand of garden power tools, backed by 95 years of German engineering excellence. To get your hands on their range, visit your local Still dealer today.
Garden Express are Australia's leading mail-order gardening service, offering a wide range of quality garden products. Each week on the Garden Gurus Live, the team at Garden Express will share a weekly offer. So make sure after today's show you jump online and visit their website.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Garden Gurus Live. I'm Trevor Cochran. It's great to be joining you this morning, and thanks so much for tuning in. There's already a great audience tuned in. Of course, we are here for the whole purpose of helping you with your garden, answering your garden questions. We've got a couple of interviews, or an interview at least, with my good mate David Van Berkel, and I'll give you some tips on indoor plants, my favourite plant of the week, which the two tie in really well. What's really important with this program is that you let us know where you're from, not just your state, but particularly in the bigger states, your city, or in the case of Victoria, if you're inland, if you're in Bendigo, then the way we treat plants in Bendigo to the way we treat plants, say, down in the Mornington Peninsula is totally different. So please let us know all that detail. It's really important. And of course, if you like what we're doing, then hit the like button. It always helps an awful lot. Had a wonderful weekend. It's been very cold and cool in Perth, but one of the things that does is it brings through a lot of colour in the late season fruit. So one of the fruits that I've just been harvesting to make some, you'll probably see those, is the Tamarillo, the tree tomato. And we're making a beautiful chutney sauce out of it over the next few days, because we're harvesting those like crazy. I wonder what you're harvesting in your garden. Love to hear. So let us know as we go along. Let's get straight into it. And we have got our good friend from Boronia in Victoria, Tyson, joining us first up. Now, Tyson does a lot of seed planting, and he's asked, can I plant sweet corn seeds in my garden bed? And this is a really good question, Tyson, because, you know, sweet corn really does best in warmer climates, in warmer weather. And there is a risk going into the winter, particularly in Boronia, where your soils can be quite heavy, where the sweet corn may start to germinate, and then you may see the seedlings start to turn yellow and die. And that's really because you've got high levels of moisture in the soil, but you've also got this situation where you have quite a few fungal diseases become active in that sort of high level of moisture. And so that can wipe little seedlings out quite quickly. So my advice to you, Tyson, is not sweet corn. So maybe there's a whole bunch of other things you could be putting in right now. All of the brassicas, mizuna, some of those, the Asian vegetables. I know you're putting in bok choy. All of those things are just fantastic, but probably not sweet corn where you live. There are some places where it doesn't matter around Australia. In Perth, I could grow it all year round pretty much, but definitely it gets a bit too cool and wet. Now, let's go to Adelaide. It's great to have second question of the show coming in from SA. Would love to grow herbs indoors, but my kitchen faces west. Okay, Dot, thanks so much for asking that question. Facing west, I'm just thinking that through. Probably what you want to do, Nev did a story recently. There's a company called Mr. Fothergills. You'll know them because we actually give away their seeds as prizes, but they are a seed supplier. But they also have these great little indoor herb growing units, and they've got a little light on them, and they look fabulous, but they give you the ability to grow a lot of herbs. They're a really cool idea. And there's a couple of them. There's one that's soil-based and there's one that's hydroponic. I would recommend you get your hands on those, and you can have that on the kitchen window. They'll get a bit of natural light, but at the same time, anything that they need as far as supplements go will be provided by the little unit itself. And it's a wonderful little display unit. It'll look fantastic. So hopefully that helps, Dot. Thanks for joining us. We're in Hawthorn now in Victoria. George. Hi, George. Please give me some advice about growing and maintaining gerberas. Right. Gerberas are a beautiful plant. A lot of varieties in the old days were very susceptible to something called powdery mildew. It's a white, mildewy, sort of powdery substance that you'll see on the leaves, and it would kill the plants off. And I would think that that you probably want to be looking for some of the newer varieties because they've bred in resistance to that particular disease. I prefer to grow them in pots. I always find that that's the best way to go. Use a really good quality potting mix. That Osmocote Premium, the pro version of the blue bag, is fantastic. It's got all the nutrients in there to stimulate growth. But one of the things, George, that really gets great flowering with gerberas is liquid fertilizing. So if you can liquid fertilize over the foliage, it'll stimulate lots of flowers. And the other thing is keep them in a really brightly lit position, but not exposed to anything that is a little bit too cold. So if you're getting frosts or any of those kinds of things going through, that can really knock them back. But gerberas are a great plant to grow, and one of the best things you do with them is bring the flowers indoors and put them in vases. Dale, okay, this is via email. Dale's just been watching the Garden Gurus, and you saw the Holman battery-operated retractable hose. Amazing. I've got one in my garden, absolutely brilliant. You're going to purchase one, but you want the brass nozzle that you had. Okay, so yeah, I did. And the brand of the nozzle is actually Holman. So they sell a range of brass nozzles through Bunnings warehouse stores. You can get those in there. They're really good, and you can change over your plastics. What we often find is those plastics, they get exposed to sunlight, they get dropped and cracked, and particularly during the sort of really cold winter weather, they can sometimes get a little crack in them and leak and so on. The brass nozzles will last for a long, long time, so you can't go wrong. Holman is the one that you want to keep your eye out for. It's the same brand as the retractable hose. Hopefully that helps. Go to Tassie. It's great. Great to have people joining us from Tasmania. And Linda is in Hobart. Thank you. Help. What's happening to my full-size rhododendron? It didn't flower this season either. Now, there's lots of suggestions on Google, but they only cause me confusion. And that's the problem with Google, is that there's a million and one different potential issues. I would love to see this picture. So let's have a look at it. Okay. And I'm wondering if you guys might be able to give me that picture up on screen too, Robin, because I can see it, but it's not quite big enough for me to really tell where it is. Oh yeah, okay. So you've actually got this disease called leaf spot disease, and there's two forms of it. One is what they call Pseudomonas, it's a bacteria, and the other one is Cercospora, which you've actually raised here that Google suggested it could be. I think from what I'm seeing there that this is actually more Pseudomonas, and it's often what they call black speck disease. Interestingly enough, they're both treated the same way. So I can give you the suggestion to spray them, and it's usually with a copper-based spray. There's one that's called it's Cuprox, and it's sold as Coside. And what you want to do is get out and spray over that foliage. Now, this disease will not affect flowering. It might affect the quality of flowers, but you should still get flowers. It's the winter, it's the cold weather that triggers flowering. So if you had a warm winter last year, then last spring or early summer, your rhodos may not have flowered or may have only produced a small number of flowers. If you get a really cold winter, you'll find that the flowering should be a lot better. Triggering flowering or supporting flowering using a high potash-based fertilizer is always a good way to go. And definitely don't feed your rhododendrons with a high nitrogen fertilizer because it'll encourage growth but not flower. So Coside for a start, Linda, that's the spray you should use. Spray it over the foliage, probably try and spray it under. So a really high pressure spray, hit it really hard and see how you go. Dorothy is in Victoria. It's great. Can I prune my grandiflora magnolia? That's the evergreen magnolia that we all love, and there's lots of different forms of it. Little gem. What else have we got? Teddy bear. There's a whole range of them. Yes, the answer is yes, you can, and now is probably the perfect time to do it. In fact, I've got a number of them at home, but I've got two in particular that I'm going to hit pretty hard in the next few weeks to really bring them into shape. And that will encourage a really strong flush of new growth, which always looks good because it's lovely glossy foliage. So hopefully that helps. Libby, you're in Glen Iris in Victoria, so we're staying in Victoria at the moment. You've got a huge problem at the moment in your garden. Every time you dig a shovel full of dirt, 20 centimetres deep, you find these nasty white grubs. Now, during the spring, I plant tomatoes and other veggies. When they start to bear fruit, the plants wilt. Now the wilts and the grubs are probably not related. The grubs could be eating roots and causing some wilt, but I suspect with tomatoes. So there you go. So this is what they call a curl grub, and it's a pretty ferocious larvae that just eats through the roots and eats a lot of them. And if there's a lot of them, they can really set your plants back. Now, there are a few different treatments, but there is one that's relatively low toxicity, and it's one that comes in from Yates, and you can just literally sort of drench the soil with it. It's called Curl Grub Spray, and if you head into your local Bunnings store, you'll find it there. I think they still have it in a hose on, which makes it a lot easier to hose it over the soil, and it will take these guys out, or at least knock the populations back a little bit, which is all you want to do. You see the odd one, it's not a problem. And if you've ever watched magpies walk around your backyard, they'll often do this thing where they tap the ground like this, and you'll see them watch them. They tap the ground, they'll wait, and then they'll pick at something, and more often than not, it's worms or it's curl grubs that are near the surface. And that tapping, they're mimicking rainfall. And when the curl grubs think that there's a lot of rain, they'll move to the surface so they don't get saturated in the soil. Same with the worms. And of course, when they come to the surface, the magpies see the movement and pull them out and eat them. So don't want to go spraying too many of them, because you do want them to be food source for birds. It's an interesting way, the way Mother Nature sort of works. All right, we're staying in Victoria, Latrobe Valley, beautiful part of Gippsland, just gorgeous. Our problem is, this is Jan, we have just laid turf. Now, our dogweed is killing the grass. We tried rocks in his water. That's those volcanic rocks, or charcoal's the other one, but it doesn't seem to be working. So it is a very difficult thing to do. The only thing I can suggest, and before a dog wheezes or poos, you'll watch it'll sniff the ground, and it finds a spot where it was before, and then it'll go and do its business somewhere very nearby, or where another dog has done it, it'll do the same thing. The way to try and stop them from doing that is to counter-scent it. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. You can use citrus, so you can mix up some lemon juice, for example, in some water and spray it over the surface of the ground. Or the other one is white pepper. It's actually really quite effective. And you just go across and you dust the ground with the white pepper. And when the dog comes over and sniffs it, and it immediately sneezes, and it'll generally move over to a garden bed, and it'll kind of go in there and won't do it on your new lawn. So it's a bit of an old sort of trick. Doesn't require anything really too hard, but it does tend to keep the dogs off the lawn, which will give them give the lawn enough time just to get established, hopefully. All right, Janet is in the Gold Coast. You've sent us a picture. Can I identify this small tree for you? It's growing in your garden on the Gold Coast. I haven't seen this. So this small tree looks like something that I'm used to seeing with golden flowers, xanthostemon. So I'm not 100% sure. You know what I should do? I should hold this. Let's just put this on hold for 1 second, and I'm going to ask my mate David Van Berkel when we catch up, because he may well be on top of that one as well. But it does look like a plant that was pushed very strongly for a period of time. It's a tropical plant, and it does make sense because it is up in the Gold Coast. But I've never seen it with red flowers, which is why I seem confused here. So I'll do a little bit of research, Janet. Let us get back to you. Tony is in Melbourne, in Yarra Valley. We've got lots and lots of questions coming through from Melbourne, which is fantastic. Right, let's have a bit of a look here. Tony, I've got a question asked last show about teddy bear magnolia, saying the leaves are going brown. Now, the ground's pretty good, generally wet. You mentioned that it might be to dry. I've attached a photo for any other reason you might think this is happening. Let's have a look at this photo. Oh, so it's a little baby. The thing with teddy bears is they have to get their roots down and start moving through. This definitely looks like it's been through dry stress, and the good news is it's old. So if we go back to the previous photo, you can see a lot of the newer foliage has less damage, whereas the older foliage has the worst of the damage. If you were to pull those leaves off, give the plant a good feed right now, it's going to flush new growth out. And I think you'll find that it'll be perfect. I don't think there's anything wrong with that plant now. But there is a message in there, and that is that it must have dried out at some point. So maybe a bit of a wetting agent, but next summer. You don't need to do it now. I'm sure it's all good. All right, Simone, you're in Perth. okay, what is the best soil for planting vegetables in a planter box? So if you're thinking about buying soil in, what you want is one that's been really well composted, and there are some really good ones. You don't want to compost by itself, so you do want a planting soil. When you're talking a planter box, if you're talking like a big planter box, you're going to talk about one of those bulk soil yards. And what you want to do is when you go to that soil, you want to be able to pick it up and you want to smell it. And if you smell it and there's a strong ammonia smell coming out of that, it's too immature. That soil is not ready at the moment. It hasn't broken down, which actually happens quite a lot. So you want to be looking for something with lots and lots of compost in it. Often for myself, I will buy a couple of cubic meters of mushroom compost and I will mix that into the existing soil and leave it for a couple of weeks, maybe add some blood and bone at the time of putting it down and mixing it in. And then in a couple of weeks' time, I know that that soil is ready to go. So that's for bulk. And if you're talking about in planter boxes being small pots, planter boxes, you want to go for one of those premium quality potting mixes. So the blue, ideally the blue bag of Osmocote Professional would be the ideal scenario. So that could be the way to go. Okay, let's keep rolling on. Hopefully that helps. Well, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. Why don't we go straight to David, because we can talk about that question that was just raised before, and maybe he will know what that particular plant is. Janet from the Gold Coast. G'day, David. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. Trevor, yourself?
Yeah, good.
I've got a million things going on. Firstly, I wanted to mention before we get into anything, we've put some fuchsias back on. A couple of weeks ago, I think we were literally sold out the moment we went on the show. And so we've got some more in, and they've just gone live, Rowan says, a few minutes ago, which is fabulous.
Great. That's fantastic. Well done, because I know everybody was trying to get their hands on those collections, and of course they start selling out. You end up with odds and sods, and it's a little bit more difficult to supply what people want. And now's the time to be getting fuchsias into the ground, folks. It really is. It's such a beautiful plant. Mine at home, I've got a huge one, David. My mum planted it about 4 or 5 years ago. In a garden bed right at our very back door, and it's just grown into this enormous shrub, and it just flowers for really probably 11 months of the year. There's 1 month in sort of February, early March, where it's so hot here, it burns and it really struggles, but the rest of the time, such a great plant.
Mate, what's funny about that is, as an avid gardener yourself, your mum gave it to you, and that's fuchsias all over, right? It's mum's plant, and they are just amazing. Great value. Yeah. Just always full of colour. Yep, gotta love them.
Full of colour. Now, speaking of full of colour, this time of the year, there's a lot of people looking for plants to put in that'll bring them sort of some really lovely colour. And over the last few years, there's been this massive trend towards Hellebores. And I first fell in love with them in Korea. I saw them being grown in botanical gardens there, just as mass plantings of ground covers. And they're just spectacular when they come into flower, aren't they?
Oh, aren't they just, you know? And there is, you're right, there's a lot of work, a lot of development being done, a lot of research into, you know, how to get more compact varieties with bigger blooms and more blooms. Yeah, we definitely have those coming through from time to time, but you still can't beat those traditional ones. Again, just a bit like the fuchsia family. Hellebores have been around for years and years, Trev, and there are just some golden delights that you can't miss. As you can see on the screen there, you know, that lime green with the polka dots on it reminds me a bit of, you know, some really exotic orchids. They're just that beautiful.
They really are, they're really, really different. I know Bonnie's just done something on the Garden Gurus with a special offer you guys have got. Are you able to support people maybe getting some starter plants going into gardens? Because that's the perfect way to get it going quite cost effectively, isn't it?
Absolutely. And they do have a dormant period. So coming up not too far from here, we'll have some dormant plants. But at the moment, we've got some 75 mil plants on an offer. A collection of 3 singles, Trev, or a collection of 3 doubles, saving 20%.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. So what does that equate to? I'm pulling the list up now. So that's a big saving. So they'd normally be what, 40 to 45 bucks or something like that. You've dropped them to 33 and 35 for the doubles by the looks.
Yep, 35 for the doubles, Trev. The doubles are just exquisite, mate. They're the ones that I plant under my trees and to give me that winter colour. A couple of the black ones in the single range are pretty good, but for me, I can't beat those doubles.
Yeah, David, it's actually, you raised a really important point. It's probably one of the most commonly asked questions of any garden expert out there, and that is, what do I plant under trees that have shaded pretty much everything out? And hellebores, that's the environment they love, isn't it?
It's perfect because there's quite a few understory plantings, but they don't really give you that vibrancy of colour. So heucheras, hostas, mate, hostas can give you some really fragrant blooms and
Yeah.
foliage colours, but they can't give you that pizzazz of a flowering plant like the hellebore.
Mm. An interesting thing about hellebores is they are remarkably hardy. So once you get them in, they're a pretty tough plant.
Exactly. They just, as I said, they go a little bit dormant, like a bit of a feed as they come into their new foliage, which helps the flowers as well. But just hardy, beautiful. I've got a couple of samples here, Trev, of the size that we're shipping out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they're nice big plants. How do you go, David, when it comes to shipping to protect them and so on? You've got clamshell packaging and stuff to protect them, haven't you?
I've got the clamshell packaging. Rowan's just pointed to one for me. I've got to pick up for you.
Oh, yeah.
We clam in around the plant, protected through transport, made from recycled plastic and fully recyclable as well.
Well
little
done.
environment there too, Trevor.
Yeah, well done, mate. That's really important. Now, look, so 33 bucks and $35 for the doubles, and that's a collection of three. Order them online, gardenexpress.com.au, and obviously the most important thing is get in quick, because like the fuchsias, there are so many people end up writing back to say, I'm so disappointed I missed out. But good news is there's fuchsias. Get in early whilst you're ordering your hellebores. Grab your fuchsia collection at the same time.
Plenty of single varieties available as well, Trevor. Of course, roses have just gone up as well. I can't have to mention that our roses just went on sale. So they're the first of the fresh bunch, some beautiful, beautiful 2-year-old plants, probably some of the best I've seen in a while. So that's great news as well.
Yep. It's a really good point about roses. It is the beginning of the bare-rooted rose season, and this is a chance for you to buy roses very cost-effectively, delivered dormant, ready to plant into your garden. So come springtime, they'll literally burst into growth and start producing flowers sort of in that October, November, December period, delivering you some incredible colour and fragrance. So check that out whilst you're there. Now, look, David, I wanted to ask you, you may or may not be able to answer this. I think that this plant that Janet from the Gold Coast sent us a picture of, and we're gonna put it up so you can have a look. Is that xanthostemon?
From what I see, it's the Stenocarpus.
Stenocarpus. Do you think that's Stenocarpus sinuatus? Do you?
Yes, I think it is. We go to Nambour, we take the Blee Road out the back, and there's a couple just flowing over the fence, and I always catch that vibrant orange, and I can't see the image close enough, but that would have been my guess. My first reaction was, that's the firewheel tree, Stenocarpus.
All right. Well, look, let's have a look at that. I'll do a little bit more research and see whether I can get some better photographs. It might help me as well. But that's great, David. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Great deal again. You guys, you do a great job, and it's obviously a pretty busy time of the year for you there. Do you have any of your packaged bulbs, spring bulbs, still left?
No, Rowan's shaking his head. No, last week I managed to get an extra, I think, 55 packs. They went on, they're sold, and spring flowering bulbs are done for the year.
They're
Trevor.
done for the year. Well, I was going to, I'm doing a little gig with Carl and Ellie on the Today Show tomorrow morning, and I was actually going to mention it's your last chance to get them in, but I'm not going to mention it because you haven't got any to get in. So well done.
Get roses. Mention that one.
We'll talk about bare-rooted roses. All right, mate. Hey, listen, have a great day. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. See you soon.
See ya. Cheers. He's a great guy. They're such a wonderful family business, that business, and multi-generations now been supplying people with amazing quality plants. And this day and age, delivered direct to your door doesn't get any better than that. So remember, it's gardenexpress.com.au, and they're a big supporter of everything we do. So we're very appreciative. All right, let's stay in Victoria for a moment. Heidelberg. Lisa has come through Heidelberg Heights. She's got a Tahitian lime losing most of its leaves in the last couple of weeks, and one small branch is starting to die. Is it suffering from root rot? And what should I do to save it? Has a couple of small fruits and some flower buds. Should I remove them all? Lisa, what it's actually lacking, it's got two things. So it's lacking trace elements, really important with citrus. So if anybody's got citrus out there at the moment and they're dropping leaves, it is a classic sign that they're lacking in magnesium, iron generally, and some of those core elements, things like manganese and so on. You just need to give it a really good boost of nutrient into the soil. And the cold weather accentuates that sort of thing. So that's when you start seeing leaves suddenly dropping in big masses. So that's what the problem is. In all honesty, I would take the small fruits off. I would take the flower buds off as well, because you really wanted to put some energy back into producing leaves, because leaves use the sun to make energy and help the plant grow. But you're not going to see a lot of change over the next 2 to 3 months. So feed it now and then probably feed it again in September. You should start to see some real good growth. And once you've got your trace elements up, so citrus are so hungry, they should be given trace elements at least once a year. And often trace elements are either sold as a little like 1 or 5 kilo bag of trace elements or as rock minerals. But either way, it's getting all of those micronutrients into the soil that's so important. And that's when you stop seeing these kinds of problems. And citrus generally, particularly limes, are very hungry. They want to be fed all the time. So make sure you're using those specialist citrus fertilizers when you're trying to get that sort of growth. Okay, Ruth Ann is in Sydney. Hello, Ruth Ann. Thanks so much for joining us. We've had such wet weather. I'm worried about planting my spring bulbs. When should I? Now that the weather has been so rainy and continues to be so. I was in Sydney last Thursday and I was blown away. I think I've been there twice in the last month and cannot believe how much rainfall you have had. And you are quite right. If your ground is really sodden, it could be quite problematic. You could get some rot of spring bulbs. What you could do, however, is mound up the soil. So dig the beds over a little bit, get a bit of a mound and plant into the top of the mound. That's probably the key to ensuring you don't get them saturated, which is really key. So maybe that's the way you could go. If not, hold off and hopefully the weather starts to back off just a little bit. But the rainfall in New South Wales and Queensland has been phenomenal, and we are all dealing in that environment with some different challenges to what we're used to. Okay, Susan, hello. Thanks so much for joining us. You're in Victoria. I know that much. You didn't tell us exactly where you're from, but it's your first time ever last year planting Tommy tomatoes. Now, I never got a single tomato from the plants, and it's freezing cold here in Vic, which we know all about. We've had a team over there filming in the last week, and they've come back all frozen. You've got 3 tiny tomatoes growing. What's going on? Well, we're really in the wrong season now for tomatoes. So you might see a lot of growth. I've got a few Tommy tomatoes actually growing at my place. So it's quite an upright form, produces lots of little round cherry-style tomatoes. Not going to see a lot of fruit setting this time of the year. And it's really in the springtime when they will. If your plant survives the winter, then it might actually come back. But generally, now's the time to pull your tomato plants out of the ground, rest the soil, maybe put some good organics into the soil, boost it up with some nutrients, but let it rest for a while. And then next year, don't plant tomatoes in the same spot that they were. Plant something else in that spot and put your tomatoes in a new place in the garden. Susan, the key really is to enrich your soil with lots of organics and to make sure you're feeding these plants on a regular basis. So either a liquid plant food or a good steady supply of nutrients via something like Osmocote. It is such a good fertilizer for regular steady feeding, and you can never give them too much. You're never going to burn your plants with something like that. Okay. Staying in Victoria, we've got lots of questions coming in from Victoria today, which is fantastic. And Sue Ellen is in Broadford in Victoria. You're in a cool zone. When is the best time to trim blueberries? It's about now, Sue Ellen. So if you're going to bring them back into shape, about now, because they're going to come in, they're going to start producing flower buds very soon. So you're a lot better to bring them back. What'll happen is if you trim them back, where they produce flower buds, there'll be less flower buds on the plant, so more energy will go into producing larger, plumper fruit. So it's not a bad idea to be doing that just at the moment. And you don't want to be feeding them because they're not really going to do a lot of growth until we start to see a little bit more warm weather.
Okay, Greg is from Parkerville. Greg often joins us, so it's fantastic to have you with us. Parkerville is in WA up in the hills. Now, just seeing if loofah pots can dry off the vine. The answer is they can. Wanting to use the area where they are currently in our patch. Well, actually, you can take them off the vine now. They should be getting pretty, they should be finished. The vine should be dying, to be quite honest. So there certainly is in my garden, and I'm not far from where you live. So I would suggest that's the answer. Pick them, put them in a nice dry spot and collect the seeds and maybe use the loofahs where you want to use them. Jody is in Jandakot. We're staying in Perth. We've got a few going on in Perth, which is great. I'm new to gardening and I bought a peace lily. Haven't repotted it since I brought it. Can I repot it and split it as it seems to have been a bit clumped together? You can, Jody, and you should use a really good quality potting mix. But here's the thing. Osmocote have this grey indoor potting mix, right? We're going to talk about potting mixes a little bit further on, or fertilizers, but this potting mix is really important. If you use the organic one or the any of the premium ones that use organic barks in them, you're going to see probably fungus gnats, those little black flies that are quite active. And you can see here in the gardens behind us, we're using cocoa peat along with some other special ingredients in the potting mixes we use, and we don't get any fungus gnat activity occurring from this because the fungus gnat is feeding, one, off the organics, and two, laying its eggs in it, so breeding in that environment as well. So the grey indoor Osmocote potting mix, it comes in a 10-litre bag, I think, roughly. That's what you need. And when it comes to splitting the plant, just gently ease it apart. So just pull it apart. You can put a knife straight through the middle if you want. Then you've got two plants into new pots, into potting mix. Give them a little bit of a liquid feed, but use something, to be honest, the best thing to use is something like sea salt, and you'll end up with a situation where the roots establish and it starts to set itself up and establish itself. They might go a little bit yellow immediately after the transplant, a little bit of shock, but don't panic. It's okay. It'll be fine. They should regrow quite well. All right. Well, let's have a little bit. I went off. This is the time of the year when you get into the garden, you get things into shape. And so I went off to my local still dealer to look at a brand new chainsaw. But when I got in there, there's a lot of chainsaws to choose from. So we filmed this little segment to help you hopefully learn a little bit about the right chainsaw for your job. So Chris, I'm looking to get a chainsaw for home. There are so many different options and so many different sizes. What's the best guide for people who want to get a chainsaw for home?
Best thing to do, Trevor, would be come in and see us.
Yep.
We know the products, we use the products. We're taught all the different features.
Yep.
It depends on what your job you're doing. If you're doing a small job, you can get away with a small machine, great.
Yep.
If you're doing a bigger job, you need a bigger machine. So
I've got a couple of acres up in the hills. I've got some bush. I've got some pretty big trees. Every once in a while, I need to carve them up. I think I need a pretty heavy duty sort of saw.
Yep.
But probably in a home garden environment, you can get away with something a little bit smaller. What would you recommend?
you could probably go to a mid-range saw. That way, if you are cutting something a little bit larger than normal, you're going to have the power to back it up. If you've got something that's too small, it's going to be underpowered, it's going to just slave the machine, and it's not going to do the job you want it to do.
Right. And how many times people walk in and say, yeah, I want a chainsaw because I'm going to cut some wood?
If I had $1 for every person, I'd be a rich man, a very rich man.
So the guide really is the size of the log.
Size of the log, size of the log.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Definitely.
Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so there you go. Look, it's a really important message with those still dealers is that these guys know their stuff better than anybody is ever going to know power garden tools. Still, as a brand, is a very, very high quality German brand. So it's a tool for life. But more importantly, the dealers are so well trained. So, you might think that having worked my whole life in the horticulture industry, that I would know the insides and back to front of chainsaws and all the power equipment. But technology is changing so much and there's been so many good innovations. That's why I rely on the guys from Still to help me with my problems.
and why I have no problem at all in recommending them to you if you're thinking about making gardening easier, because they have the tools for it. So that's what it's all about, and it's why we're doing. Now, I wanted to talk to you quickly about my plant of the week, and just been referring to these guys, and I have talked about this before, but so many people are asking me for the indestructible plant, the one that you just can't kill. And this is the ZZ plant, but this is the form called Raven. So it's got this black foliage. And interestingly enough, when new foliage comes through, it's just this beautiful bright lime green color until it matures. The interesting thing about ZZ plants is they're best probably only given a water once a week, particularly during the winter months. But there's something that you can do that will stimulate that new foliage growth, and that is to feed them. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. If you go and have a look in pretty much every pot that you buy from a garden centre, you'll see those little round prills, which is Osmocote. And generally it's a special indoor plant formulation for these plants. So I know that that's been used to help get these guys to grow. But Osmocote comes in a few different forms these days. So you've got the Osmocote controlled release, and then I'm going to put this down for a second. You've got this one, which is the liquid. And liquids are so much better absorbed by the plant when they're applied, particularly this time of the year. And this particular one, Pour and Feed, has won all sorts of awards for its clever design. But basically, all you do is you're literally pouring it into this cap, and it's one capful per pot, like the one I've just shown you. And there's no mixing, there's no pre-mixing, there's no watering cans, there's nothing else you have to do except for just apply this straight into the soil. And the plant, because it's liquid, is able to take it up straight away. So you see growth results really well. Now, you could probably with a ZZ plant once a month apply a cap per plant. With a flowering plant, something like, say, the Phalaenopsis or moth orchids, this is actually really good. You can get a version, by the way, that's specific for flowering plants and orchids. But this is really good in encouraging bulking of the plant, so some real good growth on the plant. So you can use this, and then when it comes to flowering time and you want to stimulate really good flower, bigger, better, more fragrant flowers with some of the orchid varieties, some of the cymbidiums that are coming through now, you can go to the pink bottle, which is the one that it's a Pour and Feed. It's the same thing, but it's a cap per plant per week. And you do that, and you'll end up with the most amazing results. Really, they're quite instant, the results you'll see, pretty much in probably 7 days. It's all happening. But the thing I love about this is you can't go wrong. Liquid fertilizers are fraught with danger. Put too much in, and you end up in a situation where you can burn the plant's roots and damage the soil, burn all the good microbes out of the soil. Put too little in, and then it doesn't really get anything anyway, so you're not going to get the growth right. When you've got a pre-mix like this, so there's no mixing, no mess, it's really easy, it's a capful per plant, you can't go wrong. So Scott's Osmocote, you want to keep your eye out for the Pour and Feed, or if it's a long-term feed that you want to do, go for the controlled release. I haven't got one of them sitting around, but it's what you'll find used all the time, and it's a little surface application over the top. And literally what it'll do is it'll release over a 6-month period, and it's a special formulation. So it's designed with high levels of potassium for stronger growth, and it helps plants resist disease. And then it's got all those vital trace elements, which are so important to getting good growth. So you've got two options there, and even using both of them is going to deliver pretty darn incredible results. Especially for those people that are fairly new to it. They don't want to make mistakes. They want to see their indoor plants grow really well. So there you go. It's your solution, because so many of us are spending a lot more time indoors as we move in to the cooler months. So bringing plants indoors is a very good idea. Okay, how are we going? It's been pretty busy this morning, but lots of viewers. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think we might get into some more questions because there's a lot flowing through. So let's go to Queensland. So we've been all over the country this week. I love it. Thank you so much. Libby is in Bundaberg. We've got black spots, in some cases, what looks like mold on our pawpaw. What can we spray them with? Right. Now, that is actually a fairly common sign of cool, very wet conditions. And that black spot, more often than not, is actually a little bacteria caused by high levels of moisture. So if I'm getting close to the cause of the problem, I've got a solution for you, which is really important. And we should all have it. So a copper-based spray is going to take a lot of those bacteria out. And we use those copper-based sprays for treatments of things like, say, grapes and grape diseases. But when it comes to tropicals, you need to be a little bit careful. You can't just use copper oxychloride or one of those Bordeaux mixes, because they could burn a little bit. So what you're better to use is that one I mentioned earlier on. It's called Cocide, and it's absolutely fantastic. So I would give them a spray with Cocide. If the black spots are in the fruit, you may or may not stop it, and you may or may not end up with fruit this time, but you will stop it from causing serious damage to the tree. And that's the important thing, because the tree will come back, and we don't always have these really wet periods like we've had. So hopefully that wet and cold are the two things that really set pawpaws back. Mine at home are so far so good, but I know come August, which is the coldest month in my garden, late sort of July, early August, it'll be decimated. And that's when I need to spray mine with Cocide to keep those bacterial diseases away. Hopefully that all makes sense. All right, Connie is in Sydney, New South Wales. Hello, Connie. I've just purchased my first bare-rooted rose. You are very early in the season. They have just come out. Any tips for the newbie to roses? Thank you. Okay, Sydney in particular, couple of tricks, really important. One is plant them into a good soil, like a really lovely enriched organic soil. Really important. Number two, when you put them into the ground, you're going to find they're just going to sit like dormant for a period of time, and then they'll start to take off. So a little bit of controlled release fertilizer in the bottom of the hole and just on top of the soil will just ensure there's nutrients in the soil for when those new roots do come out. They've got something to really get them growing strong. In the first year with bare-rooted roses, it's very much about getting the root system re-established into the ground. So getting that strong growth is vitally important. What else? Particularly in Sydney, when you plant them, really give them some good spacing between plants. So you don't want to be putting them 30 or 40 centimeters apart. You want them to be a meter apart, okay? Because what you'll find is you want all the air movement going through the plants. Diseases, fungal diseases, black spot, powdery mildew, they are the biggest causes of problems in the more tropical environments, more humid environments. So keep your roses planted well apart. And the last thing, and most important thing, is roses need full sun. So don't plant them in a spot that gets shade, particularly in the afternoon. They've got to have lots and lots of full sun, and they'll produce lots and lots of flowers. There you go. That's my rundown on bare-rooted roses. Port Broughton, Upper York Peninsula in South Australia. Margaret's joining us. Hello, Margaret. Thanks for joining us. You were watching the Garden Gurus show on TV on the weekend. You saw me talking about putting acid into the soil to correct the pH, which is a problem that you have, but didn't mention what sort of acid to use. What do you recommend? So I think we're talking about the work that the guys at Kings Park are doing. And Sue McDougall was espousing the virtues of this technique where they're balancing the soil pH by using an acid injection. Now, initially, I think they actually injected it direct into the soil, and then they worked out that they could put it into the water. And I did ask her about the acid, and she thought that it was sulfuric acid, but it's fraught with danger to be adding something like sulfuric acid into your soil, because you don't want to put too much in and cause yourself a significant problem. The second issue is that if you put it into the water, you have to make sure the water is basically going on the soil, definitely not going on the foliage, because you can actually burn the foliage. So there are some real risks. And Sue explained that after applying acid, often the plants would shock and actually drop all their leaves as well. So it's a really risky thing. There is another way that you can acidify the soil continuously, and that's by using a high sulfur-based fertilizer. So you could use sulfur in its own right around the soil and kind of dig it in and water it in, and it's going to have an acidification process. However, you can use things like sulfate of potash, ammonium sulfate, even in small quantities, but on a regular basis. So once a month, very small quantities, spread it around evenly, water it in. You've got to wash it into the soil. That will slowly acidify your soil and should help balance the pH. It's a big challenge. And look, the reverse to the whole thing is if you want to avoid having to do all of that, plant the the best thing you can do is actually plant the plants that come from that local area that have adapted to that soil pH naturally. So that's your other option. Hopefully that helps. There's a few options there to consider, Margaret. Thanks for joining us. Simone's in Perth. Hello, Simone. This is a question from your mum. Hello, Simone's mum. A hibiscus has come up in the garden. Can she dig it up and put it in a pot? Well, that's interesting that it's seeded itself in the garden. If it's one of the sort of Hawaiian varieties, you could end up with something really, really interesting. So the answer is dig it up and put it into a pot for sure. But maybe if you're going to do it, I would do it now while we still have some relatively warm weather. We've probably got another month where you're going to get away with it. Put it into some good soil. Try and get as much of the root system as you can, and it should be fine. It should transplant quite well. Hopefully that helps. We talk about sort of telling us what town you're from, and this is a good example. So Alana has joined us from Kalgoorlie in West Australia. Kalgoorlie is inland, and it's one of those places that is absolutely beautiful, stinking hot sometimes through the summer months. And during the winter, the frosts can be so cold there, a bit like places like Ballarat and Bendigo, where you get black frosts, really cold and frozen. Now, Alana has told us that just yesterday she transplanted a large Frangipani tree, 2.5 metres tall by 2 wide, managed to get quite a lot of the roots when you dug it out, and you use sea soil wetter in the hole. We've topped up the garden bed with a good organic potting mix, and we've fertilised with sea salt. Sea salt's not a fertiliser, by the way. It's a soil or plant tonic, and it's very good for stimulating new root growth. So good thing to do. You don't want a fertiliser because it can burn new roots as they start to come out, unless it's a real slow, gentle, controlled release. We've not cut back any of the branches or foliage at all. So what my question is today, should we prune the tree at all? And a general transplant rule with anything is that you take about 20% of the foliage off or the branches off when you do a transplant. And that's generally because if you've been really good at getting most of the roots, you're still going to find about 20% of the roots are gone. So 20% of the capacity to be able to support the foliage above is kind of gone, and it can cause it to die back if you're not careful. So don't be scared to prune it back. It'll be a really good thing to do, and you probably want to do it right now before we get too cold, and it can kind of weather its way through the winter months and then bounce back in the warmer conditions of summer. But you've done everything right, Alana. That's great. And thank you so much for sharing that with us and for joining us this morning. Natalie is in Seaford in Melbourne. See, this is great. I planted a crepe myrtle over summer and it's looking very sad. Its leaves have gone brown at the tips. The upper branches are thinning out. Is too little water the issue here? Our soil's very sandy around our area. Natalie, I've got some good news for you. Crepe myrtles are deciduous. So during the winter months, they start to drop their foliage. So you should see the leaves starting to get a coppery brown sort of look, and they will all drop pretty soon. Interesting thing about crepe myrtles is it's all about getting the root system established. So first 2 or 3 years, you might not see a huge amount of growth of the plant above ground, but under the ground in the soil, the root system will be doing all sorts of things, getting itself established. And that's the foundation for really strong growth later on in development of the tree. And it doesn't matter if your soil's sandy, it's just how they go. So definitely keep the water up to them during the summer months when they're growing. But right now, you don't have to worry about anything. And it's completely natural that it's gone brown on the tips. The leaves have gone brown on the tips and the upper branches are thinning out. This is a normal thing, Natalie, so don't worry. We'll go from Melbourne to Queensland. Let's do that. Carolyn is in Queensland. We've had excess rain in southeast Queensland again. No sunshine for days. And your pots of gazanias got drenched and the leaves are going yellow. Are they likely to survive? And what can I do to assist them? The good thing is they're in pots. So if they're in pots, they're in a pretty good potting mix. A pretty good potting mix has been designed for really good drainage. So they should bounce back. But nothing likes being absolutely saturated. And you guys have been through a horrendous run of rainfall, and so you are going to see the effects, but it should get through this okay. I think you'll be fine. If you're able to move them into a protected area, even better, Carolyn. But yeah, interesting problems. Let us know how you go. Sue, okay. Sue is in New South Wales, Lemon Tree Passage, apparently. Hi, Trev. We've got 3 grass trees. 2 are doing fabulously. One is turning yellow and looking sick. What can you suggest? Now, you need to get your hands on, there's two things actually. There's a fungicide called anti-rot. Get your hands on that and mix it up in a watering can and drench over the top of the plant. First thing. The second thing is you're probably going to need a systemic insecticide, and you can talk to your local garden centre. There is one called Success, and it'll be a very good one to use. You've got one or two problems, and one could actually be causing the second one. The first one is that you probably have borers in the tree. So grass trees do get grubs, and the New South Wales grass tree, Xanthorrhoea glauca, the blue grass tree, is known to get quite badly attacked by these at certain times. So drenching it with an insecticide firstly to take out the borer is a really good way to go. The second thing is, if there's been damage done to it, they do get fungal infections really badly. And that's why I've suggested the Yates anti-rot as a fungicide over the top of the plant. You can use mancozeb. Either one of them, in my opinion, are highly effective for treating those kinds of fungal diseases. Hopefully that helps. Joanne is in Perth. Hello, Joanne. Is it possible to grow fuchsias in coastal Perth? If so, which variety? In fact, most coastal locations in Perth will grow really well with fuchsias, and it doesn't matter what variety. Most of them will do exceptionally well. So I'm in the hills. They do really well in Perth. The bit that they don't like is excessive heat and excessive dryness. So it's keeping the moisture up during those really hot months that's vitally important. Okay. Now, Julie, we're not sure where you're from, Julie, but I might be able to help and I might not. So let me do my best for you. We have two Catelpas. Now, Catelpa is a beautiful tree as a general comment, but yours are nanas. Now, that's generally a smaller version of it, nana, the Latin for dwarf or for small. One's thriving, the other one's looking sick. Now, the drainage in that spot is not as good. What can I do? So this is where giving me the information of where you're from is so important, because I'm not sure if you're in Victoria. Catelpas are deciduous plants and they should be losing their foliage right now. So both of them should be starting to look yellow and going dormant pretty soon. And it could be the difference between the two of them is that one's in a warmer spot in the garden, so it's going to hang onto its foliage for a bit longer because it's still able to grow. And the other one's in a cooler spot in the garden, and as such, it's going dormant earlier. It may not be that you have an issue at the moment, and I'm not sure what kind of soil you've got, etc. So do us a favour, Julie, let us know where you're from, send us a photograph. It'll help me a lot, and I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Christine is in Nowra. Hello. Can I spread well-aged chook poo over the top of all my garden? Well, if your garden is not predominantly native plants from the Proteaceae family, absolutely, because pretty much everybody else, every other plant in the plant world will love a bit of chook poo. Does the world of good if it's been well-aged. That's really really important. I'm just moving through my list. There's quite a few coming through. Karen, we're not sure where you're from, but what do you use to get rid of cabbage moth without using pesticide? Okay. Big challenge. 2 bricks, very effective. Picking them, also very effective, but it is quite difficult. You can, if you don't want to use a pesticide, you can use things like sulfur dust. Okay, so it's a natural element. So sulfur is one way you can kind of sort of put them off a little bit, but you're not going to stop them altogether. So hopefully that guides you a little bit and helps. Claudia is in Gidgegannup. That's over here in WA up in the hills. Is it too late to plant out bulbs? Just received your order from Garden Express. No, it's not too late to plant them. Get them into the ground. That's probably the best timing. It's right now for Gidgegannup. And you'll end up with beautiful late season, so sort of in the later part of spring, masses of flower, and then they'll literally have foliage right through into probably November, December quite comfortably before they go dormant during the summer. Many of the spring flowering bulbs are the ultimate water-wise plants, and in Gidgegannup, where water is quite challenging at times, that is the perfect plant to be putting in. So it's going to give you lots of spring colour. How have you been enjoying our 20th anniversary series of the Garden Gurus. You know, we're getting very close to the end of this series, and it's been a long one. We've covered a lot of ground, but we've got a lot more to cover. And this is what's coming up in episode 13.
Australia is home to some of the most outstanding botanic gardens. When you take a look around, the plants are curated to be both pleasing to the eye and educational.
One of the first things I'm choosing to dig up for this season are my tender perennials, so things like Dahlias. And the reason for digging these up is because we get really cold weather here and negative temperatures. So if I left that in the garden, it is at a high chance of rotting.
If there was one complaint about battery-operated equipment in the past, it's that the batteries didn't always last that long. But that's all changed with this new technology. In fact, these mowers can mow up to 2 acres. That's like 8,093 point.
Well, I've got to be honest, that was a lot of fun filming that story. Those mowers are incredible. You'll see all about it this weekend. Technology has come such a long, long way, and it's very, very exciting. All right, this is our last run. This is the home straight. I've got about 4 minutes to get through a whole bunch of questions, so I'll do my best. Michelle, you're in Adelaide in South Australia. Hello. I've got a tree fern that was underwatered over summer and it stopped producing fronds. It's still soft in the centre. Is there any way of stimulating growth, or is it dead? It's a good question. The trick really will be now to give it a feed, because they should start to grow now we've got moisture. So give it a feed around the base, and maybe even a bit of a liquid over the top of the trunk and the stem, because if there's foliage in there, that'll help stimulate some growth activities. So the next month will really tell you, but give them a feed is my advice. Jaffa, you're in Fairfield West in New South Wales. My pomegranate is not getting any fruit yet. Now the tree's 7 years old. Jaffa, let me give you a little suggestion. Pommy fruit are like a good husband. If you really want to get the best out of them, you've got to treat them mean to keep them keen, because that's what's going on. You're giving it way too much love, and it doesn't need to produce fruit. It's not producing, probably not producing flowers, definitely not setting fruit, and it's only because pomegranates really love it to be really dry when they set flower. If they set flower and the weather's really dry, they're programmed to produce large quantities of fruit. And because you've had quite a wet kind of summer, I suspect it's just putting on growth. So you can do a couple of things. One is you can try and dry the ground by putting plastic sheets down next year, a little bit earlier than this time, probably around sort of that March period, and keep the soil around the base of the tree dry. So pretty much around the drip zone, you can do that. Second thing is you can give it a hard prune now. So it'll be just coming up to dropping its foliage pretty soon, and give it a hard prune, and it might just also shock it into flower next season so that it knows, okay, something's not right here. I am threatened. I need to reproduce, and that's what you want it to be thinking. You don't want to shock it too badly, but you do want to give it a bit of a shock. It sounds like it's just too happy. A happy husband, you know what they say about them. All right, Ruth Ann, you're in Sydney. Hello. How can I get my wisteria to flower? I've had the wisteria for 3 or so years. It's growing in a large pot, has lots of leaves, but it's never flowered. How can I help it to do so? So a little bit of potash is a good thing for wisteria. It does help stimulate flower. And again, sort of the latter part of the summer, when it gets really dry, it can really stimulate some great, really, really good flowering in the spring. But it's quite difficult when you've got lots and lots of rainfall, except for you've got yours in a pot. So again, plastic draped around the pot, keeping the soil dry. Let it get a little bit of water over the winter, but try and keep the soil predominantly on the dry side, and come springtime, it'll produce a great crop of flowers. Rolling along, we're in Melbourne now. My potted water lilies, I think that's lilies, haven't flowered for a few years now. Is there anything I can do with them to make them bloom again, or should I start from scratch? Now, they stay in your pond, which is 30 centimetres deep all round. Now, look, you know what? There's a really good thing with water lilies, and that is every spring you go and get yourself a couple of those tree planting tablets. There's they come from Trev. You can get them, and you put them into the soil in around the base of the actual corm of the water lily. All of that nutrient, and 2 of them, is probably, you could even stick maybe 4 sometimes, is going to just stimulate some really good flowering. So that's a great way to go. Leah is in Berkel in Victoria. Hello, I'm worried about the rain. Should I pull my dahlias up now or wait for another couple of weeks? The wetter it is, the more risk you have of dahlias starting to rot. So in your environment in Victoria, where it is really wet, and certainly New South Wales and Queensland, the whole East Coast has been absolutely drenched, I would dig them up and I'd put them into some dry sawdust and let them sit through the winter and just sort of, probably even right through until sort of October, November, and stay dormant in a nice cool dark spot. It's a good way to go. Leanne is in Doreen in Victoria. Hello. On the Crepe Myrtle, do you prune it after flowering? Yes, you can prune it after flowering is the answer, Leanne. They do. So if you do it after flowering, they do get a little bit bushier, a little bit fuller, and that tends to produce better flower crops next year. So hopefully that helps you. What you don't want to do is let them start growing and establish, and in the middle of summer go and get them a prune because you'll cut all the flowers off. So hopefully that helps. How have we gone? That's a big morning. We've had a lot of questions, and I'm really sorry that it's always only an hour, because we have so many more come through that everybody would like answered, and I really want to do all I can. So thanks for your engagement, and we will collect any of those questions that weren't answered. We'll add them to the list next Monday when I will be back for another session of the Garden Gurus Live. That's 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time and 10 a.m. for those people in WA. For those people who are packet seed winners after today's show, Robin will get in contact with you and let you know. Congratulations and thank you for your questions. And don't forget your photo submissions via Facebook. Please get them in before Wednesday. Photos, videos, love it. Just state your name, state or suburb, and the question you have with your video. Have a look at it, and we'll answer your questions live. Remember, if you want any more information, we have some great resources for you. We've got this website. It's got 850 videos on it. It's got all this, probably at least that, maybe double that in fact sheets. It's got links to all of the companies and the products, information, and everything else that we often show on the Garden Gurus TV show. And that's all there to help you enjoy more garden success. If you want to watch the Garden Gurus TV show, obviously you can watch it on Channel 9. It's always a great source. But you can also get it via our YouTube channel. That's thegardengurus.tv on YouTube. Check that out. And if you want to listen back to today's live stream or catch up on previous episodes of the Garden Gurus Live, you can do so by visiting Spotify, there's Apple Podcast, and Audible. They all have our live stream available as a podcast for you. And don't forget to tune in, because this Saturday at 4:30 p.m. on Channel 9, you'll see episode 13 of the Garden Gurus. We've only got 15, so you're down to your last few. I hope you enjoy them. Thanks so much for your support. Happy gardening, everybody. I'm Trevor Cochran. I'll see you next week.